All right, welcome to another episode of A Fresh Perspective with Jeff Charles, where we prefer principles over personality and truth over narrative. I've got another fire guest for you today. It's going to be awesome. But before we get into that, I'm going to remind you to please like this video, share this video. And if you haven't already subscribed, you need to fix that right now. I'm watching you. Hit that subscribe button. Come on, let's go. All right, great. Appreciate you guys being here with us. We're going to talk about something very important that's been in the news lately over the past 6 months plus. Now, before I bring on my guest, I'm just going to let you know that LibertyNation.com is a proud sponsor of A Fresh Perspective with Jeff Charles. Check out LibertyNation.com for all your conservatarian news, original articles and analysis, videos, podcasts, Ellen Radio, and their signature TV program, The Conservative Five. All on LibertyNation.com, conservative news where truth matters. Now, I haven't had a guest in a while, but I am very excited about who I'm having on today. She hails from Las Vegas, Nevada. She is on the front lines in the battle against critical race theory in the classroom. I give you the lovely Miss Gabrielle Clark. How you doing today, sis?
I'm doing fine, bro. Thank you. Thank you.
Good. Thanks for joining me.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah. So, I mean, I found out about you when I actually wrote an article. I had read about you in the Epic Times. It was part of a larger story of parents, getting together to take action against a lot of this, what I call woke theology going on in classrooms. And when you commented on the issue, I didn't realize that you were the person that I wrote about in the article. So when I found out, I was like, yeah, we got to get you on because this is a very important issue. I thought your story is very compelling and people need to know about it. So I'm glad that we're here. But before we get into everything, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself?
I don't even who does this? I don't know. Yes. I'm always so surprised when people want to know about me.
Yeah.
Who wants to know about me? I'm unimportant in all of this, but I'm from Houston, Texas originally. I lived in Dallas for a little while and I moved to Nevada about 14 years ago, something like that. And I raised my 5 children in Nevada. And primarily we did, homeschool and charter schools. So, this whole thing has kind of taken us for a loop because this wasn't how I intended to spend the last few years of my tenure as a mother.
Mm-hmm.
Like, this is not how I planned on spending. I have 5 children. And so my son, William, has graduated and my daughter she'll be graduating in a few years. And I thought it was going to be smooth sailing. And then this kind of happened. So, it's really been an unbelievable experience.
Yeah, I bet. Now you're working with a group called No Left Turn in Education, and I know that they hooked you up with a lawyer and all of that. Now, do you also work with a nonprofit outside of the lawsuit, or is that mainly the relationship there? Or?
I am the No Left Turn Nevada chapter head.
Oh,
So
okay.
yes, so I'm the chapter president for Nevada, and I'm fully invested in this now. Like, when I got started with them, I spoke with Elena Fishbein after having seen her on Tucker Carlson, and I needed help. After all of this was going on. And there wasn't anybody really to go to for help because this is such a new issue. So when I spoke with her, and she found me legal representation, I just felt like, I have to be involved in this fight because it's for all of our children, And who better than the person who is making an issue out of it and watching it happen in real time in my family.
Yes, yeah, definitely. So, so what is, just so the audience can know, what is No Left Turn in Education?
No Left Turn in Education is a nonprofit organization that and you can go to our website at noleftturn.us. And basically, No Left Turn tries to assist in anyone with it for anyone who is having any kind of indoctrination issue in their schools. We try to help people. We try to help people with legal representation, find them legal counsel. We try to help them find emotional support. We help them try to work on their school districts and their school boards. We draft legislation that can be used to present to lawmakers. We work with lawmakers. We do a lot for all
Yeah.
of for it to be a nonprofit, and despite what media reports have said, we ain't got no money, we broke, but we do it anyway. We do it anyway.
You're making it work.
All of us are volunteers. There's, I don't think there's any, we're all volunteers. We all work double overtime to fight this indoctrination situation.
Gotcha, gotcha. So, I mean, and so you had the Nevada chapter. I mean, other than what happened in your case, which we're going to get to in a second, I mean, how often is this happening at other schools in Nevada? I mean, have you had a lot of parents coming forward and trying to get help?
In Nevada, I mean, in Washoe County, there is a huge force in Washoe County in northern Nevada. We're we're starting to see more and more people down in Clark County stepping up and stepping forward and joining in this fight. And I've heard stories from all kinds of parents. Unfortunately, some of this stuff was happening before I ever even got involved. And most
Mhm.
of these parents have since removed their children from the school district and put them in either homeschooling or in charter schools, or they grew up and aged out of K through 12 schools. So
Mhm.
a lot of these, I mean, and some of these stories are really devastating. And so it's happening, and it's been going on for a lot longer than anybody would have ever imagined, because we really didn't know as parents exactly what our children were being taught until the pandemic, and we had to walk by our kids virtual learning classrooms and go, "Whoa, whoa," like, what was that?
Yeah.
What did he just say? Like that sort of action. And so, a lot of us were, oblivious to what was going on, including myself.
Yeah, and I'm glad that you brought up the fact that this isn't new. Like a lot of people think that this kind of just started, but it's been going on for years. I mean, whether it's critical race theory itself or whether it's just other forms of progressive ideology that's being pushed into classrooms, it's been going on. I mean, even outside of the realm of race, I mean, there are a lot of things that teachers are teaching kids, especially about sexuality, that their parents may not know about. And I think the pandemic did bring a lot of this to light. So I'm glad that you brought that up, because people need to know that this has been an ongoing effort for a while. Um, here's my question. A lot of people have different understandings of what critical race theory is, right? I mean, there's people on the right that think one thing, people on the left that think another. Even among proponents of the theory, you can get different ideas of what it is. How would you define it?
I get that question a lot, and you know, I feel like that's one of those things that is kind of a trap, right? Because what it intended and what it started out as in as far as legal scholars, okay, and the actual application of it in its inception is fairly innocuous, as a theory, right? But then when it got, kind of, I don't know if I can say this on bastardized, when it got all of the right. So when that happened, it turned into, a nightmare for parents, and I think it was Maj Toure who said, it's not critical race theory in and of itself, it's the implementation of how it's being introduced. And I mean, I somewhat can agree with that. And and people are saying, well, that's not critical race theory. You know what? Let me tell you something. Ice cream started out with cream, milk, and vanilla, right? And some sugar. That was all ice cream used to be. You look at a box of ice cream now, it's got all kinds of words that you can't even pronounce, but it's still called ice cream, though. You know what I'm saying? So so I feel like I don't have to have a definition of what it is to be able to say that it is harmful to our kids. You know what I mean? Like you don't have to have a definition. And trying to nail something like that down, we're talking about, if you're talking about what it was in its inception, that was something that was taught over months to highly educated, advanced degree people. So you want me to give you that? You want me to give you a succinct definition in 5 minutes, like that?
That's
So
tough.
yeah. So I mean, and there are people who can talk, but like you said, one of the reasons why it's impossible to do that is because the definition is not a succinct thing. It's the theoretical framework is difficult to unravel and unwrap and explain, and equally so certainly to implement into K through 12 education.
Yeah, sorry, I was having a little coughing fit there. All right, good. Yeah, I got one of those going on. Yeah, that's interesting though, because I think a lot of people don't realize that the way that critical race theory is being applied may not necessarily be the way it was intended. I'm reading about it right now, and there are definitely some huge problems that I have with it. And there are areas where they say some things that I agree with. And I think a lot of it depends on which person you're talking about, whether it's Richard Delgado or Derek Bell or someone else. They all have, I mean, there are things that they even disagree on. So it is a more complex issue. However, at the same time, it is being used in a way that is damaging. And I always say, no teacher is actually sitting down and saying, hey, we're going to read Derek Bell and this is critical race theory. They're saying, but they're using elements from critical race theory in a way that's harmful, like Maj was saying. So what do you think of, I mean, because I believe it was Texas, Idaho, Oklahoma, and a bunch of other states have passed legislation banning it. What's your opinion on the legislation that's been passed?
I haven't even read through any of the legislation that's actually been passed, but I can say there are some harsh critics of it for good reason. Because when we're talking about banning an idea, that goes into some scary territory. You know what I'm saying? But I do, by and large, feel like we would, if our kids were being taught some ideology from the KKK, they definitely ban that, right? So I mean, we need to tread carefully, I believe. I don't think that this is the appropriate venue to introduce these kinds of concepts in the K through 12 setting. However, we do learn, if you're in college, you do learn about the KKK. You might be assigned to read Mein Kampf. You know what I mean? Yeah, you might be. So those kinds of things at the college level do need to be dissected and analyzed, so that we can have a better understanding of the thought process behind these theories and behind these ideologies and behind the intent of this stuff, right? But in the K through 12 setting, I feel like it is practically impossible to introduce these without crossing a line.
Right.
You know? And so, when we're talking about banning, I've never been in favor of, a whole lot of banning. But if somebody said, "Hey, do you think we should ban, this book, this instruction manual written by the K?" Yes, yes,
Yes,
yes, you
definitely.
should.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, you should ban that. That should not be in K through 12. That's, if you want to learn about that stuff, that's something that needs to be taught in a collegiate environment.
Yeah, and I talked about this on my live stream last night, but I also think it's important to make the distinction between teaching something and indoctrination, right? I mean, because I'm not a teacher, but if I were, I could teach about fascism, right? I can say
Right.
this is what fascism is, these are the opposing views, yada, yada, yada. Or I can say, hey, kids, this is why fascism is great. I mean,
Right.
so, and what I'm saying, what a lot of the problems are coming up when they're actually trying to indoctrinate children and persuade them to buy into a lot of this stuff. And it sounds like that's what you're seeing a lot too. That's what's going on with what was going on with your son.
Certainly. I mean, there's a prescriptive nature in these classes where they're teaching this. I mean, and they're teaching it in all different areas. You go to a math class and you might, learn about why this is white supremacy. Like, really? And, it's
Really?
math, like,
Wow.
and so it just, when it becomes prescriptive and, in my situation, in my son's situation, saying, requiring that a student list his identities, his protected identities, and then ask to attach signifiers that are derogatory
Mm-hmm.
is precisely the reason why we have these laws, so that people don't do that. And so it's just, like I said, when you're talking about introducing this stuff to K through 12, you really have to be very careful. And I don't think that it's possible to do
Mm-hmm.
with, because and two, a lot of this stuff is circular thinking, right? So it's just like, okay, you can't teach something objectively if if the idea behind it is cyclical. You know what I mean? Like it just
Yeah.
doesn't make. So I can't see how anybody could think the way that this is being introduced is teaching history or teaching civics. It's indoctrination and it needs to stop.
Yeah, it does. I mean, and I see them out there lying about it. Oh, this is just about teaching history. No, it ain't. No, 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 no.
Well, what's
I,
so crazy is I have like I've shown people actual facts and actual, lessons, and you can
Mhm.
go to no left turn.us and see, actual, um, slides and things from the class. And now we have, two expert reports, um, one from, Dr. Eric Smith and one from Dr. Ilana Redstone, and they've been accepted by the court. So that is what is happening. It is teaching, critical race theory, and it is indoctrination. It's not an objective, discourse.
Okay, all right. And I do have a quick question from the chat here. Your what grade was your son? And he graduated high school, right? So he was a senior.
Yes, he was a senior.
Okay, great. So let's go ahead and get into it. So give us an overview of the lawsuit. Give us an idea of how it came about, and just tell us the story.
Just tell it, right?
Yeah, just tell it. Tell it like it is.
Let's do that. Yeah, so my daughter and my son were both going to Democracy Prep at the Agassiz campus. My son had been going there for several years. Um, Before it was Democracy Prep, it was the Andre Agassi College Preparatory Academy, and they, I guess, 3 years into his time there, Democracy Prep merged with the Agassiz School, and this thus became Democracy Prep Agassiz Campus. And my daughter was going there, and so was William, and we were, in the middle of lockdown, virtual learning, virtual learning action, and I started listening to what was being taught in my daughter's class, and I was like, I don't, Anna, is that right? Is it? What did I just hear? And as the days went on, I started paying closer attention, and when I'd heard enough of what was going on, I pulled her out of that school and I put her in a different school.
Okay.
And I went to my son. And it was particularly scary because at that time they were talking about going back into full in-person learning.
Mm-hmm.
So, I mean, they were talking about going back to in-person learning in like a couple of weeks from that time. So when
And
I
just to clarify, so you found out by basically overhearing a class, or were you look? Okay. So go ahead. I just wanted to make sure we got that straight.
Yes, I'd overheard what was going on in my daughter's class, and then I started paying close attention to what was happening. And once I realized what was happening, I went into my son's study area, and I asked him, "Hey, this is going on in your sister's class. What is this? What's happening in your class?" And I happened to walk in on him while he was in that class, and I saw some things on the screen, and I was like, "What?" And I was like, "Get out of this class." Right.
Mm.
And then, and so I said, "I want to see everything in this class." And at that, while he was telling me about some of the things that had occurred in the class, and some of the, and one of the assignments that he was instructed to complete in the class. And when I went through it and I started looking at everything, and I saw like the, oppression, privilege matrix or worksheet or whatever you want to call it, when I saw that and he didn't complete it, and I was like, "William, this is not legal. This is not right." And he was like, "Well, I didn't finish it. I didn't, And so I said,
So,
"Hey,
so I'm sorry to interrupt, but just can you give us like some specifics of what was being taught? Because that's what people want. I mean, and there was some in the article, but yeah, can you break some of that down? Because I want people to know how crazy this stuff is.
Well, I mean, that's you can see all of that stuff on No Left Turn. Like you can actually see
Mhm.
the slides, and there've been lots of people to tweet about it and all of that stuff, and you can see actual slides. But there was a SpongeBob meme that said, reverse racism doesn't exist, and it's just like, uh, or I mean, there was just, saying that you have to unlearn, your values that you're brought up with. You know what I mean? Stuff like
Mm.
that. Those are the kinds of things, or asking him to list all of his identities, and then attach oppressed or oppressed or privileged to those identities. You know, and my son was like, "Okay, white males, like privilege. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And who wants to be? You don't want. I don't want to be that. I don't want. I don't want to be the oppressor of all. You know what I mean? Like who
Well,
wants to
especially
be
since he
that?
didn't do anything. I mean,
Especially since he didn't do anything. And at the time, William, I'm a widow. My William's father died when he was 1 year old. And at
mm,
that time, I was recovering from a disability, and we had been living in a motel, and William had been sleeping on a mat on the floor. There's nothing privileged about his life, and to try to attach that kind of signifier just based on the color of your skin or your gender, or you know what I mean, or your religious practices, or you know what I mean, those kinds of things, that is just, it's dead wrong. And it's it's a violation of his civil rights, which is why we took action.
Now, I believe I read that they wouldn't even allow you to opt him out of that teaching. Is that correct?
That's right. They wouldn't. We asked that he be opted out. You know, I don't want him in this class. You know, this is wrong. You know, you shouldn't even be teaching it. Let's, this is inappropriate. Um, and they refused to opt him out of the class. They had since changed their course on that. I believe it was in April or May. They allowed, I can't remember if it was April or May, but all the filings and everything has that. But they had, changed course and allowed him to graduate, expunged his record of any bad grade, and allowed him to opt out of class, expunge his record, and thereby allowing him to graduate. But by then, the damage had already been
Yeah.
done. Like the damage is already done. And so it's just like, this is one of those things that even if you decide that this is what you want to teach in your school, then parents definitely should have the option to opt out of it. I don't
Got
think it should be taught in school at all. You know what I mean? I don't think it should be taught in school at all. I think that there's no way to teach it effectively, accurately, or without bias.
Right. Especially at that age group. I got a question in the chat. In which class was William being subjected to this stuff, or was it multiple classes?
Um, I I only saw um, in his civics class. It's called Sociology of Change, and all the seniors in their charter school network have to take the class as a graduation requirement.
Okay. Okay. And a question from here. Your son is biracial, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
So I'm this is I love talking about this particular aspect, okay? Because this is we are the exception that proves the rule why this does not work in America. I am biracial. My mother is black. My father was white. I
Okay.
was I was married twice. My first husband was black. My second husband was white. So I have some kids who are 3/4 black and some kids who are 3/4 white. Now, for all intents and purposes, some of my kids look black and some of them look white. You know what I
Right.
mean? Like
Right.
some of my kids look. They don't look like they're mixed with anything. They just look one or the other. William just so happens to look like a white man, and blonde hair, blue green eyes, the whole thing. So when this all happened, I'm thinking, so my white kids are oppressing my black kids? Is that what we saying in here? Like, you know
Some of your kids are oppressors. Some of them are oppressed. Yeah.
yeah, like, is that what we try? And my black kids can't get ahead because my white kids are holding them back. I mean, like, that is foolishness.
That's a very interesting family dynamic. The oppressor and oppressed. Usually, a family is just oppressor or oppressed, but you got both.
Right. And I think that is the primary reason why you see um mixed families being vehemently opposed to this kind of ideology, because nobody wants their kid to go to a school where the school is telling them mommy is oppressed by daddy. You know what I mean? Or daddy is being oppressed by mommy. Nobody, and that's the breakdown of it. I recently heard a story. One of my friends told me a story. And I actually saw some of the evidence with my own eyes. A couple are getting they got a divorce because the woman claimed that the husband was oppressing her, and she did, and subconsciously she didn't even know it. This is the insanity. This is the insanity that this is bringing. It's literally tearing families apart. And I mean, and she was crazy in love with him and he was crazy in love with her, and they got married. And you know and then just out of the blue, she's indoctrinated, and he's been oppressing her this whole time, and she didn't even know it. I mean, we're talking about smart people too. We're not talking about, we're not
Yeah.
talking about dumb people. We're talking about smart people who they are so smartified, and they've learned so much of this theory, they done swoop back around to stupid again, you know.
Yeah, there's a writer named Malcolm Muggeridge, and in the long patches that he wrote in some essay, at the end he talks about, he uses the quote, "We have been educated into imbecility," and that's what's happening here. Like, I think a lot of our colleges, not all of them, but a lot of professors are educating their students, but they're educating them in a way that makes them stupid, and
Yes.
it's very sad.
It is. It's unfortunate because it's like I said, these kinds of things should be discussed, but they should be discussed in a way that isn't prescriptive. They should be discussed effectively and allowed discourse and allowed dissent from an idea. And I think that that's what is missing in so many colleges. So then for it to spill into K through 12, it's not a good formula. It's not a good recipe.
Yeah, it's not. And I'm going to ask you more about the lawsuit, but before we get further into that, just want to remind you to head on over to libertynation.com, a proud sponsor of A Fresh Perspective with Jeff Charles. You can sign up for the daily briefing, subscribe to the member zone, or just check out the latest cutting-edge conservative news and analysis. Always new and original material with a giant helping of nuance on libertynation.com, conservative news where truth matters. Now, I wanted to ask you, do you know if these lessons that your son and daughter were being taught were they like a new initiative, or had this been going on for a while?
You know what? I can't even really say that definitively. I mean, I have my suspicions, but that's one for the lawyers. You know what I mean? That's one of those questions for the lawyers. I can't really say definitively how long that had been going on, but I do know that, the tragic, situation, in the tragic death of George Floyd really sparked, just I feel like it just made people so emotional that they a lot of reason and rationality just kind of went out the window. I mean, and it is understandable. Watching that was traumatic for the entire world, and so I definitely can understand the feelings, right? But I feel like I want to eat cake all the time, but you can't do that. You know what I'm saying? I mean, I don't mean to make light of it, but it's just, we still have to keep a cool head, and we still have to
Right.
live. And this kind of this kind of retaliation is not productive in society. We can reform our laws, and we can reform our systems without dividing everyone and scapegoating and belittling the belittling of Black people is offensive personally to me. Like I'm like horribly offended that someone thinks that they have the moral superiority to decide that I'm oppressed. You know what I mean?
Right.
Or that they know better than me about my life and about how I've lived it, and that anything bad that has ever happened to me is because I just didn't have the tools to make it better, or because I wasn't smart enough to make it better. That is insanity.
Yeah.
That is horrible, and I would never allow my children to think along those lines.
Yeah, it's disempowering, right? I mean, like when you send that message and you reinforce it over and over and over again, then you can't be surprised when people don't achieve their potential, because they're being told over and over again that they can't do it because of their skin color. I mean, it's like, I think it was Joseph Goebbels. He said, if you repeat a lie long enough and over a long enough period of time, people will come to believe it, even if they know that it's not true.
That's true.
Yeah. And here's the thing. I'm not saying that every teacher is doing this. I mean, I don't even think this is going on in most classrooms, but it's going on in enough. I mean, it's going on in more than enough to where it's a concern. And what I was complaining about last night on my live stream, it just seems like both sides are talking past each other, and we're not sitting down and having these rational conversations. Because honestly, I think, and here's my tinfoil hat, I think that the fringe people on both sides, especially in the media, don't want us to have productive conversations on these things. So it's sad.
I 100% agree with that. And at No Left Turn in Education, that's one of those things that, we strive to make sense of things and not pile on or add fuel to the fire. And direct the conversation where it needs to go. You know what I'm saying? And not just kind of let the pendulum swing from one side to the other. We are liberal, conservative, we're all different races, we're all different nationalities, we're all different socioeconomic levels. I didn't finish. I did. My last grade completed was the 9th grade, right? And I got a GED years later, and I work alongside Dr. Elena Fishbein, who is a PhD in social work, and there are others. You know what I mean? And so, there is the spectrum of people. We are representative of America, because we believe in freedom. We believe in teaching a classical liberal education, teach the truth, teach it like it is, and don't add any of the orthodoxy to it, and any of the prescriptive narratives to it.
Yeah, definitely. Now, what about other students and other parents at the school? I mean, how have they reacted to the curriculum?
Well, we were in virtual learning, so I haven't really talked with any other
Right.
parents.
True.
Because I didn't see any other parents, so I haven't really discussed it with any other parents. But I can tell you this: William has received a lot of support from his peers.
Oh, good. So that tells you that there were probably other students who weren't approving of this. And I think in the article it said that most of the racial makeup is Black or Latino, right?
Yes. I mean, it's in North Las Vegas, right at the corner of MLK. That's where the school is. It's it's in the hood, and they put it there for a reason. It was supposed to be, it's supposed to be a beacon of hope for the Black community and the brown community that are in a situation where the schools were failing. And so there are a lot of charter schools in that area to give parents an option and to give parents a choice. And I think that that's what is so unfortunate about this situation, is that, we really believed that this was the best option. I really believed that this was the best option for my children, to get out of school without becoming a statistic, without, and gaining all of the knowledge and all of the preparation needed to ascend to a college level. And I one of the things that really just kind of bugs me about how this is being portrayed is that this is this situation is anecdotal, right? So it's only, this is my experience. But if we're all saying the same thing, how is it anecdotal? You know what I mean? If all of these people are saying the same thing, just because there's not a study on it, and just because just because it's not being reported or there's not widespread, that doesn't mean that it's not happening, and it doesn't mean that these things are not harming anyone. Us in the Black community, we've been saying that for years. We've been talking about all of the issues that we have in the Black community that are going unnoticed or underreported or completely unreported. And then they say, well, that's anecdotal. No, it's not anecdotal. It is,
Right.
to, so many families in the Black community.
Well, yeah, and the left thinks that they can take advantage of the fact that this stuff is hard to quantify. Like you said, it's hard to really do a study on this. But when you have story after story after story after story coming out, which I have seen, and I've read some of these lawsuits that actually have the curriculum in the lawsuit, or at least parts of the curriculum, I'm sorry, you're not going to gaslight me into thinking that no teachers are teaching this.
Yeah.
And again, I'm not saying it's the majority of teachers, but it's enough to where I'm convinced that there is enough to be a concern. So that argument doesn't really fly with me. I mean, but again, a lot of people on the left are lying about it, or they just don't really understand what critical race theory is, and they're just pretending like this is just all made up. I mean, and I've got my criticism for the right too, but still, I'm focusing on the left right now because they're doing themselves a disservice, and they're doing the rest of the country a disservice. This stuff should not be used to influence K through 12 children to adopt this mindset. I mean, whether it's a white kid who's being taught that he's an oppressor, so he has to feel guilt for it, or a minority child who's being taught that he's oppressed and he can't get ahead because of what have you. And that is not the same thing as just teaching history. Nobody has a problem with teaching history for the most part. But if it were just about history, most people wouldn't have a problem with it.
And it's sad because it's like there are reasons to question what is being taught in schools as it pertains to American history. There are things that should be observed that aren't being observed. But this takes it to a whole nother level where we can't even have that conversation because you've poisoned the well. You know what I mean? Because they've poisoned the well. So it's like, at what point do we have to say, okay, everybody needs to back right off and come to an agreement on what we should be teaching that we haven't been, and what we should stop doing that we have been. You know what I mean? And it's like you can't keep overcorrecting in this way and think that there's not going to be any backlash.
Gotcha. So I have a challenge here from the chat. I'm going to let you react to it, and then I'll react to it. Haven't we not been able to have what? Okay, I think I know what he's saying. Haven't we not been indoctrinated by the Eurocentric views of history? Why don't you all fight against this?
Honey, look, I'm fighting for my kid. If this hadn't happened to my kid, and this hadn't happened to my son, I wouldn't even know about it, because it hadn't even been, a real issue that has been brought up, in a productive way. You know what I mean? Like we've never gone to Congress and said, hey, look, we think that this should be taught in our schools, and here's the reason why. You know what I mean? Like our community doesn't get together and say, okay, we want X, Y, and Z to happen. It's just it's usually a reactionary thing. And it's like, until we get it in our head that you're going to have to utilize the system the way it is. Because if every time, I mean, this is not the 50s. Okay. We don't have to physically get out there and fight for our rights. We can actually go and utilize the systems that we already have to work in the things that we want to have worked in. And I understand that's not, That's not the favorite way to get change, because it's a long process. But this is how societies ascend. This is how societies grow. And if every time there is, a huge paradigm shift, people are going to suffer. And this is one of those things that, guess who's suffering? It's our children.
Yeah, it is. Now, I'm going to react real quick because I have to take this on because this is such a stupid argument. I'm sorry. I love you, Anthony. You know I love you, but this is a stupid argument. And I think you know it is. But I'm going to go with the second part. If a black kid can learn about Thomas Jefferson, a white kid can learn about Nat Turner. I 100% agree with that. And I even agree, if you want to push back against the Eurocentric view, I would stand with you against that. However, nothing that you said has anything to do with what we're talking about right now. Teaching about Nat Turner has nothing to do with teaching a white student that he's an oppressor. We're not talking about teaching better history. I think that conservatives should put up a better curriculum if they're going to complain about the history that's being taught. Fine. But this is a deflection. It's a form of whataboutism. You're deflecting from what we're actually talking about, and this is a lot of what the left does. And some of this is just because people misinterpret what others are saying. People on the left misinterpret what the right is saying. People on the right misinterpret what the left is saying. No, people on the right are not pushing back against history in general. I know there are some isolated cases, I will admit that. But at the end of the day, if I ask somebody, should white kids learn about Nat Turner or Benjamin Banneker or what have you, I'm not going to get any pushback on it. So it's a false equivalence. Critical race theory is not just about teaching an accurate view of history. It's a lot more than that. It involves history, but it's not just about teaching history. So let's go ahead and move on. And forgive my grammar. It's okay. I'm a writer. I make those mistakes too. Whatever. Let's see. I had some other questions here. Do you know of any other lawsuits that are kind of like yours? Because I think we're probably going to see more of these. I know of one in Pennsylvania, but do you know of others that are happening?
There are lawsuits coming up in different areas, but one like ours, no. There are some that where people are pushing back against the general ideology, but individual instances of a particular person that, you know what I mean? Like my case is not, against critical race theory as an ideology per se. I mean, my case is a violation of civil rights, compelled speech, and violation of Title VI and Title IX, those types of things. So it's unfortunate because this kind of thing is happening all over the country, but people are scared. They're scared to say anything. Primarily because they don't want to be canceled. They want to continue to have a job. They want their kids to grow up and not, have that scarlet letter next to their name when they, go to college or whatever. And also because this is expensive.
Yes,
Like
it is.
this fight, I was not prepared. I was not prepared at all. And I am so grateful to all of the people who have donated to us, and grateful to all of the public interest funds and everything that have provided support to us, because without them we would not have been able to do this. But that's what they're counting on. That's what a lot of these schools, that's why they felt emboldened to do it, because they've been able to get away with things like this for years. They've been able to get away with violating people's civil rights for years, and being an activist in the classroom instead of teaching a classical liberal education.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So So with your particular case, and I know that there are certain questions that you can't answer, and like I said, you can shut me down if you can't answer it. But how is it progressing so far? I mean, are there what can you tell us about it?
Well, we have, like I said, we got a remedy on in the form of a concession by the school. William was allowed to opt out of the class. His record was expunged, and he was permitted to graduate. But like I said, the damage had already been done, so we reassessed and filed an amended complaint. Because, like, he just because they made this concession, that's not justice. Look at all he had to go through to get that.
Exactly.
Our family
Exactly.
went through a nightmare, doing all of this, and so we want this case adjudicated. So we filed an amended complaint, and it's making its way through the courts now.
Good, good. I mean, I'm hoping that you'll keep us up to date on that, because I really want to see how this turns out. Because I mean, it's not just about this case here; it's about other students as well. So a message needs to be sent to these schools. Hey, if you're going to try to indoctrinate, there could be some consequences, and that's the only way to get them to stop. Now, I read the other day that the largest teachers union in the country is, or actually no, the second largest is looking at filing lawsuits against the states that are banning it. And they're also looking at ways to go after other opponents of CRT. I mean, what do you know about that? Or what have you been seeing as far as the pushback? Because it seems like the leftist has been on the defensive, but they're trying to go back on the offensive here.
Well, that's one of the problems with banning and fighting in the school boards, because the things that get the most attention in the media are the flooding of school board meetings and the banning. But I feel like either of those things, both of those things can be shut down and they can be overturned. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Those are the kinds of things that are not a permanent remedy, right? But if we win our case, that's a permanent remedy. That is a permanent remedy, and it can be used.
I'm so glad you said that.
It can be used for every school in every school district. Even some of it can even be used for private and parochial schools. The fact remains that no matter what happens from here until the end of this case, the law is still the law. And it doesn't matter what, it doesn't matter what, what anybody does in the interim. This is still the law. And the judge gave us a positive finding that we would likely win on the merits of this case, because the law is the law. And if you find yourself in a situation where somebody violates your civil rights and you have an avenue to fight them with the laws that are already on the books, then why in the world do you need to do all that extra? You know what I mean?
Yes. Yes. That's exactly what I've been thinking. Like, you can pass those laws to ban it. They'll just figure out other ways to teach it. But lawsuits, now that can shut it down. Like if schools are really abusing the students with the way they're teaching things, if there's a threat of a lawsuit, they're going to stop doing it, or at least not doing it in such a destructive way. So to me, what you're doing is actually leaps and bounds more effective than what these governors and state legislatures are doing by implementing bans. I mean, the bans kind of it's a feel-good measure. If people vote for it, that's fine. The parents have the right to determine what their kids are taught. But if you really want to shut it down, we already have a legal system. And like I said, there's another lawsuit in Pennsylvania, and I think we're going to see more of these, and these will be more effective at combating this, along with presenting a better alternative to what the left is providing as well. We can't forget that, because if we don't, then this will just be a short-term victory. But I'm glad that you brought that up.
And yeah, thank you. And you know what? We do have alternatives. At No Left Turn in Education, you go on the website and there are resources for alternatives. There are lots of different people who are creating alternative curriculums that teach about history, okay, without all of that nonsense. You know what I
Yep.
mean? Like you can effectively teach about history without without uh belittling some of your students and scapegoating others. You know what I mean? Like this doesn't and dividing everybody. You don't have to do that. We can still teach people about the tough times in our history without pitting one against one another. You know,
Mhm.
and I really do feel like uh as far as lawsuits are concerned, lawsuits, my late husband was a lawyer. So
Mhm.
whenever my son's rights were being violated, that's where I went. Because but I do understand, how people are drawn to, lobbying their legislators to take immediate action and
Right.
doing something themselves, like flooding the school board and meetings and stuff like that, because I think that it's more than a feel good action. I've said that before too, but I've had some time to really think about it. And some of these parents are just so frustrated, they feel like they have to do something.
Yeah,
And
they want
lawsuits
something
take
done.
a long time. Lawsuits can take years. So to have something done immediately and to have a remedy immediately for some people is more urgent than others,
Mhm.
you know?
Yeah, and when I say feel good, I'm not talking about on the part of the parents because they want concrete solutions. I'm talking about our some of our legislators. I think that they're just trying to do the stuff to make it look like they're doing something about it.
Oh,
I'm a cynical guy, Gabrielle. I mean, that's just how I am.
you
I hope
have
I'm
to make
wrong, but
a little bet and you have to play the game,
yep,
they have to do what they have to do.
yeah.
That's the nature of politics. They're not doing anything we hadn't already seen before. So we really shouldn't be surprised by that.
Yeah, I will say that I am glad to see people focusing on local politics for a change. I mean, that has been a silver lining that has come out of this. I hope that this keeps going in other areas because, like I said, it's not just critical race theory. There's other stuff that people are trying to inject into education that parents, you're not going to like it. I mean, it is. They tried to do that here in Austin. They tried to inject a lot of, I'll just say, sexually inappropriate material into the curriculum. It got voted down. Even in New York City, in New York, parents are pushing back. And New York is not a red state, right? But you've got parents pushing it back against a lot of the wokeism and a lot of the other issues. So I'm glad to see this happening. It needs to be showcased more.
Yes, and that's at No Left Turn in Education, we believe in education, not indoctrination. We fight indoctrination in all its forms. So when we talk about stuff like social emotional learning, which I was so shocked when I started reading and when I started seeing what was being introduced to 10-year-olds, to children, some of the 10th grade reading materials. It's just like this is porn. Like you're
Yep.
looking at this stuff and you're like, oh my god,
Yeah.
this is the
And
stuff
you're not
we're trying to
exaggerating.
keep
There
away
has been
from.
literal porn.
Yes, this is stuff we are trying to keep our kids away from. And there's all kinds of things like the feminization of boys and women and girls being kind of invaded, you know what I mean, and replaced. It just, some of those things are just going way over the line of acceptance and understanding. You know what I mean? And then it's being viewed as phobic in some way. You know
Mhm.
what I mean? No, honey, we don't want our girls to be experimenting at 10. You know what I mean? We don't want we don't want our boys to be, cowed into being effeminate, for you know what I mean,
Mhm.
just because they're boys and they're acting like boys. I don't want my sons to grow up and not understand what it means to be a man.
Right.
I have 4 sons, and all of my sons know what it means to be a man, despite having been raised by a single mother. And that's because it was important to me that they understand what being a man means, because we have a very serious lack of masculinity in our country right now. And I stand up for men. Bring on that toxic masculinity. Tired
Good.
of paying for my own dinner. No, I'm kidding. I pay for my own dinner. I got a boyfriend.
If there was any reason to stand up for masculinity, I would say that would be it. But yeah, we're running out of time, but we need to have more of these conversations. Like, this was awesome. This was very eye-opening. I want to get more updates on your case as it continues. I really appreciate you joining me. Now, for people watching this, I put a link if you want to support Gabrielle Clark and what she's doing in her struggle against the school. There's a link in the show notes that you can click on and you can donate. And I'll also be posting this video on redstate.com as well. Before we sign off, why don't you tell everybody where they can find you?
You can find me tweeting on Twitter badly. Let me see. I think it's Gabs Clark 5. I think that's my handle. And you can also find me on noleftturn.us. And you can scroll through the whole thing, join, send us the questionnaire if you want to help, or if you need help. You can find me there. I'm under the Clark lawsuit. And like you said, you can support our case at Give, Send, Go. Support the Clarks.
All right, awesome. Well, thank you for joining me.
Thank you so much for having me.